Hello, this is the May Be Mindful podcast, and I am your host, Hannah May. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the May Be Mindful podcast. I'm your host, Hannah May, and today we're going to take a deeper dive into boundaries, and we're going to get a little cellular with it. We're going to talk about energetic boundaries. So last time we talked about relational boundaries, like what you allow, what you accept, what you tolerate, and make yourself available to in a more practical way. And while it might seem more subtle, it actually allows for greater impact, because when we understand the depth and the way in which we're affected in the world, and the way that we can, in fact, impact in the world, then we can have greater impact. We can have a different experience. We don't have to be ruled by our reactions and other people. And this is freedom, right? Freedom to be our authentic selves, freedom to pursue the life that we want. And that's important, that we know that we have the ability and the right to do that, so we don't have to walk around in a helpless mentality, a victim mentality, feeling defeated. And relationships and the people around us and our circumstances obviously have so much impact on us. So when we go a little deeper with this, we can reclaim sovereignty and stand strong in the things that otherwise might make us feel small or overwhelmed. So why are energetic boundaries important? Because energy is everything. Everything carries an energy. Everything has a frequency. We know this, okay? We know this. And the interesting thing about humans is we have a very limited range with our 5 senses to the vast spectrum of the electromagnetic field. We perceive less than 0.1% of reality, okay? What we see with the naked eye is only like a pinpoint of light, a ray of light of the whole. So we're limited to a tiny range of light of this visible spectrum. And when we only rely on our logic and our thinking and our human body, we only see in the 3D, we will only stay superficial. And when we start to tap in and start to understand that we can cultivate our spiritual body and start to navigate these energy fields in a new way, then a lot more opens up to us and we become less limited, if you will. So this is where your environment, your relationships, what you witness starts affecting you on an internal and energetic level, right? And you know, some people, yes, are born more sensitive. They just are. It's part of their gifting for whatever reason. A lot of times it can also be trauma related. There's also emotional resonance. A lot of people walk around calling themselves an empath, and they're like a severely unrecovered codependent, you know, and they feel everything because they learn to be hyper vigilant through their conditioning or through trauma. The bottom line is that we all have the ability to become more sensitive energetically, to connect more deeply with ourselves, and to learn and to grow spiritually. And that, I believe, is true for most people. There's this thing that happens. It's a kind of enmeshment, an emotional resonance that doesn't have a boundary. But really, we're not a victim. We can take responsibility for this and create separation when we can distinguish where we need to detach and what's ours and what's not ours. And also healing is a part of this. We need to heal in order to not have things impact us in the same way. When you heal the wound, that trigger point just isn't there anymore. Like it's just gone. And we've talked about embodiment a lot, but when you're paying attention to, say, somebody else's problem, you start to live and embody the energy of that, and you can lose yourself in that, even when it has the best of intentions. So this is when you're not just witnessing something, you actually begin carrying it. You see somebody's pain, you start taking responsibility for it. It is suddenly like passing through you and you're embodying it. It's in your body. It can become worry. It can become heaviness. It can manifest physically in sickness, in dis-ease. It is something that you feel responsible for. And before you even realize it, you have done this. This often comes down to conditioning, if these are automatic responses, and what happened in our early attachments, like what was projected onto us, where we felt we had to take responsibility if there was chaos or pain or disillusionment or shame, any of that. Okay. And so then it can become automatic. So then it's about waking up to these cycles, becoming aware and creating a pattern interrupt for ourselves. There's so many examples of this. I can give a couple. So I had a client who's a social worker. She loved her work. She felt really lifted up in being able to be of service, to help moms, to help children. And that's really where her heart is. She's very gifted with that, in connecting with these kids and these other moms. But there's an aspect of it that felt or started to feel so heavy and intolerable. And so that was the signal that she was carrying more than was hers to carry, right? But if that's the environment that you're in, and that was the environment that she was in on a daily basis, in witnessing things that she couldn't single-handedly change, or that people maybe were not willing to change. Maybe there was the mom who wasn't willing to get sober and show up for her kids in a new way, and she was witnessing how destructive that was to the children, and that was so heavy and challenging for her naturally, right? So you have a compassionate, caring, empathetic heart, and obviously if you're at all connected and clued in, that's going to impact you. But it's the difference between being able to have a boundary for yourself and recognize where you need to take care of yourself. Because when it started to impact her to the degree that it started to diminish her well-being, then there was an embodiment, there was an imbalance that was happening where she was embodying the energy of what she was witnessing. Now, it had emotional resonance for her. It was essentially touching on something that was coming forward to be healed in her. And so this is where the work is always ours, and where we can always step back into our power and create a shift for ourselves. And obviously in that type of environment, there's going to be a lot of challenges in that. When I started doing this hypnosis work, it called me to a much higher level of self-care and boundaries for myself, because I was constantly in the energy of someone else's predicament or paradox. And if I were to take ownership of that, or think that I needed to change that or fix that for them, there's an enmeshment that happens versus my job and my role. And the reason why I'm successful with my clients is because when I empower them and I hold the space for them to solve that problem, if they're not willing to show up for themselves and do differently, or if they're not open to see differently, then that's on them. So I'm not flipping a switch for anybody. Likewise, my client, right, she doesn't have the ability to force change or information if somebody's not willing to accept and receive it. So there's a level of acceptance as well in that. But when we address these deeper things that are being reactivated in us, triggered, then we see that that is our work. We don't have to externalize and go outside of ourselves to change that. We don't have to get into the energy of somebody else's stuff. That's like, all right, this is where it's gone too far, when it starts draining me, when I start losing myself. So there's this invisible line that can sometimes unconsciously, most of the time, get crossed, because we're not just communicating with words, right? our entire system is broadcasting information. Your heart emits an electromagnetic field, your nervous system is constantly reading the environment, and your body is picking up cues before your mind can even understand them. And that which we are attuning to is based on, and the meaning that we're assigning those things is based on our past experience, and this is in the subconscious. And of course, we talked about that last week around the emotional resonance and the meaning that we are assigning what we're witnessing or the kind of interactions that we're having. It's very layered and it's unique to the individual because I have a different subconscious to you. So we can both witness the same event. We can both walk into the same scenario and have a totally different meaning for us and have a totally different reaction, right? We can come out of it with a very different perspective and view of what happened. Same thing if two people are having an argument in a political debate, like we're witnessing things sometimes in a polarized way, and it's based off of our deeper belief systems, which is based off of our conditioning, because most of our beliefs are borrowed. They're sort of pressed in, as we've discussed, and we need to really find our own. And that's part of the, deeper soulful work of individuation and self-seeking and spiritual growth. So it becomes a problem when this enmeshment happens, when we lose ourselves, when we feel responsible for what we're sensing, or when we make it about ourselves. And that's a really common issue as well, to sense somebody's dissatisfaction and think that we are wrong or there's something wrong with us because somebody else is unhappy, right? And so then your system can start to believe, well, if I'm holding this, I'm helping. But you're not. You're just becoming dysregulated by somebody else's stuff. And our responsibility is to ourselves. And some information that came through with a client recently around a really cool piece of work that they were doing in their relational containers in their family, also in their work, was seeing that they have the right to their joy. They have the right to be joyful, no matter how discontent anybody is. And they grew up with a belief and the experience that they had to get small and sort of swallow their joy and squish it down because the people around them were not happy. And it was really heavy. So they learned to play small because they felt guilty for it. They were penalized for it. They were criticized for it. And then they felt shame for it. And then there was this overwhelming concern of needing to take responsibility for the dysfunction that they had around them. It was an alcoholic home. And so this is really common with an adult child of an alcoholic, this conditioning that if I'm holding this, I'm helping, right? And it's just not the case. Like, you're helping so much more by being in alignment with yourself, by being in your joy, by being in your gifting and showing up authentically, versus in 12-step, we refer to this as staying in your lane, like mind your own business. Get off their side of the street. If you're on the wrong side of the street, things can go wrong, right? Like, there's collision that happens on the wrong side of the street. I had a sponsor once that said to me, just take your eyes off their paper and stick your eyes back on your paper. That's what you need to focus on. And what can look like empathy is often hypervigilance, old emotional conditioning in a nervous system that learned to scan and absorb to protect itself. So a lot of these are protective mechanisms, protective parts that came in to just make sure you didn't experience pain, to make sure you got through it as unscathed as possible. There's a lot of maladaptive strategies that we can let go of and become open to a much gentler, easier, less forceful, less exerting way of being. There's a moment where we leave observation. When we stop observing, we start embodying, because we become the subject versus the observer and the witness. And that's the challenge, I think, for a lot of us. When we remain open and curious and in observation, and we can just take a step back, like pull up a chair, notice what's happening in our own bodies. And then there is the practical piece of actually removing ourselves, if need be, from that situation. If it's a harmful dynamic, if you're dealing with conflict, if you're dealing with somebody else and their perception and a story that feels really bad for you. There's many routes to go with that. There's the conversation, there's the get clarity route. If that's not available and we're dealing with somebody who doesn't really know how to navigate conflict resolution, then you might want to talk to somebody else about it. Get another perspective. Take care of yourself. Remove yourself. I'm going to tell you what I find to be most helpful for myself in anchoring into some stability with this, because again, we're dealing with invisible dimensions. We're dealing with the electromagnetic field. We're dealing with our fascia system, and this incredible emerging field of science around that is validating so much of my experience and a lot of these things that I talk about. But we're so deeply layered, and there's so much that we don't understand. And that's okay. We don't have to understand it all and comprehend it all in order to have a different experience. And it can be as simple as anchoring into a grounding practice, simplifying, pulling attention back to our being, like taking our attention off of the endless amount of information in the universe, in the field around us, in the world, in what we're looking at on social media, in the news, in other relationships, in our family, and putting our spiritual, our mental, emotional, and physical well-being, making it a priority, putting it first, and regrounding into peace. I just want to close with this amazing metaphor that my 11-year-old gave to me. She was doing a Minecraft game with her little sister. They can't do chat rooms, don't worry. No predators allowed. And she was creating this whole amazing world, and they had this moat. She had this moat of water around her. She was talking about when whatever they are, the creatures come, the moat keeps them out so they can live happily in their kingdom. And I said, oh, I was like, interesting. I was like, how do we build a moat? I was like, how do we build a moat so that disturbances can't come bother us in that same way, so that we can just live joyfully in our kingdom? I said, what is the moat? Like, how does that relate? And my little 11-year-old looked at me and she said, the moat is peace. And she like got all big-eyed, and I was like, oh my gosh, the moat is peace. The moat is about reclaiming our birthright and our sovereignty and standing on the ground that is ours. And we don't have to let everything in. We have the ability to become aware, to become awake. We reclaim peace, and then we have clarity, because a regulated system, an aligned system, is able to really pretty clearly differentiate what's not important. When we're experiencing inner conflict and we're not sure, and we're embodying some other kind of energy outside of us, we've lost our peace. There's a point of friction, and we're needing clarity in order to understand how to let this go, or how to come back to balance with something. So I just thought that was a cool metaphor. Anyways, just because you're feeling something doesn't mean it belongs to you, and it doesn't mean it's true. Those are two really important things to take with you. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you with that. Maybe journal on it, see what you get, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the May Be Mindful podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at maybemindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,